Thanks for joining us on our streaming service, CBS News Colorado, for your first alert avalanche forecast. I'm your first alert meteorologist, Callie Zanandri. And joining me now is Brian Lazar, the Deputy Director of the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. Brian, thanks for being with us.
No, thanks for having me.
Well, Brian, let's start with the big picture first. Where does the snowpack stand right now?
Well, as anyone who's been paying attention this winter so far knows, we're well below long-term average. Here's a statewide map that shows snow water equivalent compared to long-term median throughout the state of Colorado. Statewide, we sit at 58% of normal. Things are a little bit better way further north near the Wyoming border, and not so great down in the southwest. So it's been a pretty dry year. Maybe one of the silver linings is we have some company. We're not alone. Here you can see Colorado outlined in that dark box, and you can see most of the western U.S. is sitting at, well below long-term median. So misery does love company, and we can take some solace in the fact that we've got a lot of companions with a terrible snow year so far. As you can see here, we are sitting at this black line, which sits below red, which is the daily long-term minimum. So we're not, that far below the record low, but we are setting records every day now until we get another substantial storm.
Now, what are we seeing across Colorado's backcountry right now?
Well, since that last loading event from last weekend, the snowpack has started to stabilize and come into an equilibrium with the recent loading event. So you can see that most of the state here sits at moderate avalanche danger. This means natural avalanche activity is unlikely. Some slopes do remain, a concern for human-triggered avalanche, but you can see even more green moving onto the map. And in those areas, we've got generally safe avalanche conditions or low avalanche danger. And this is essentially why you can see the last storm event from last weekend, as expected, led to a big uptick. These bar charts show the number of avalanches per day. And that last storm led to a big uptick in the number of avalanches that we saw throughout the weekend. Since that snow has left and the drifting has subsided, you can see we're on a steady decline in terms of the number of avalanches that we've created since the last loading event. We did see most of our avalanche activity running on easterly and south-facing slopes, and that's because this snow came in and with a lot of pretty strong northerly winds, which drifted the snow even after the snow stopped on Saturday through the early part of this week. So that loaded these southerly-facing slopes, and why that's of note is these have generally been our safer go-to areas where we've been telling people you're less likely to trigger an avalanche. That's really no longer the case since we moved a lot of that new snow onto these southerly-facing slopes. So we have to kind of recalibrate where our safe areas are.
Now, Brian, you mentioned weak layers buried 1 to 2 feet down. Why is that depth particularly concerning right now?
Yeah, and so this is a general snowpack. The snowpack structure does vary depending on where you go in the state, but any weak layer within the top, kind of 3 feet of the snowpack remains susceptible to human-triggered avalanches. And so the structure does vary, but if we take big, broad brush strokes at it, essentially we've got our recent storm snow from last weekend that is sitting on our upper weak layer. And the upper weak layer is the weak layer that formed during our January drought that we just buried over the weekend. Most of the avalanches are breaking in this upper part of the snowpack because they're the most easy to trigger. But we do have a variety of weak layers in both the middle of the snowpack from Christmas rain events, from January drought events, and we have weak basal facets or depth hoar near the ground. And why this is important is if we get any avalanche to release in the upper part of the snowpack, it does have the potential to gain enough volume and step down into these larger weak layers. We didn't see a lot of this kind of activity, but we did see some, and so we still want to point out that it's a concern, particularly on those northerly and east-facing slopes, which harbor these weak layers in the middle and bottom of the snowpack. And so what that leaves us with is this persistent slab avalanche problem. So the northerly facing slopes are still shaded as potentially dangerous because those harbor those middle and lower weak layers. And now you can see that the persistent slab problem is expanded into southerly facing slopes, in some cases even on the south facing slopes at upper elevations. And these avalanches are growing large enough to bury, injure, or kill a person. Here's what most of these look like. The key here is the most dangerous slopes are those that received all the wind drifting. We have the weak layers pretty much everywhere, and so what we're missing in the more safe areas is the slab. The slab is present in places that received the most wind drifted snow, and you can see that this avalanche is really illustrative of the kinds of avalanches we are seeing. Wind-loaded slopes right below ridge lines. This is all from last weekend. So here's a ridge line. The cornice gives us a really good clue that the wind drifting is going from left to right in this photo. And here you can see on those wind drifted slopes, we had avalanches release. Again, here's one from down near the San Juans, right near ridgeline. You can see highly variable snow depths, a lot of rocky areas right below ridgeline, interspersed with big, fat, plump pillows of snow, and that's where these avalanches released. Now, like I said, we didn't see many of these avalanches step down into the deeper weak layers, but we did see some. Here's a pretty eye-popping one from Mount Baldy near Crested Butte. This avalanche started in those upper weak layers. It ran part way down the path and then stepped into those larger deep weak layers, and it ended up with debris piles, well over 6 feet deep in many places. So these are the kinds of avalanches that we're warning about. These step-down avalanches are going to be most likely on high elevation slopes that face the north and east sides of the compass.
Now, if people are heading to the backcountry, Brian, what should they be on the lookout for?
Yeah, it's all about the wind. So what we should be looking for this weekend is wind drifting. If you can avoid the heavily wind drifted slopes, you can really reduce the threat from avalanche activity. Here's a good example of ongoing active wind loading up near Monarch Pass. If you see these kinds of wind loading features, you know that the slopes right below these ridge lines are receiving all that wind drifted snow. This wind drifting is what builds those stiffer slabs. That's what creates the avalanche problem. So slopes right below current wind drifting like this are going to be the ones to avoid. And even if it's calm out there, Mother Nature will give you some clues that these slopes have previously been wind loaded. So here's an example out near Crested Butte. You can see all the sculpted snow and snow surfaces. You've got scoured rocky ridges, again with plump, fat, wind drifted pillows. These are the kinds of features that you're going to want to avoid. Here's another one. You can see more sheltered slopes in the foreground of this feature near the pine tree where the ski tracks are. But in the back, again, along this little subbridge, you can see the sculpted, textured snow on slopes steeper than about 30 to 35 degrees. These are the kinds of slopes that are going to present that stiff slab over that January weak layer that we want to avoid.
Brian, the Colorado Avalanche Information Center works to give people the best, most up-to-date information possible, and you're making it easier than ever to understand the current snow conditions.
We are trying, yeah. So we've added a couple new tools to our website so people that haven't poked around recently can find some new features. We did put all of our weather stations, so we ingest hundreds of weather stations, not only the ones that we maintain, onto our webpage, but you can find that we now have a new weather stations map, which is real-time data. It shows you where the weather stations are. You can pull up all the real-time telemetry, so that's a really good improvement I encourage people to check out. We have improved our avalanche accident data display, so you can check that out and look at avalanche data, avalanche accident data and statistics over time. The media gallery has been improved, so it's a really good way to search for and find images that are either illustrative of the problems that we're encountering, or if you just need some good avalanche imagery. And then we did make some upgrades to our avalanche field report. So, a series of updates to our website, which hopefully makes getting information and interpreting the information easier for the public.
Yeah, now we just need a little bit more snow. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Brian. And remember, you can see your first alert weather forecast every 10 minutes on our streaming service, CBS News Colorado. Just download the CBS News app, and we'll see you back here next week for your first alert avalanche report.